The brass nameplate felt cold under Thomas Bennett's fingertips. He stood in the dim corridor of Kensington Palace at 6:47 in the morning, staring at something that shouldn't exist anymore. Or rather, something that should exist but didn't. The nameplate read, Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. But the name beneath it was wrong. Completely wrong. Thomas had been a royal protection officer for 11 years. He'd seen things, heard things, things the public would never know, things that would shatter the perfect image the palace worked so hard to maintain. But this morning, standing in that hallway with early light bleeding through the tall windows, he realized he was about to witness something different, something that would change everything he thought he knew about the family he protected. His radio crackled. Bennett. Status. All clear North Wing, he replied automatically, but his eyes never left that nameplate. 3 days earlier, he'd walked this same corridor. The nameplate had been different then. It had read, Her Royal Highness Camilla, the Queen Consort. Right there, official, permanent, or so everyone thought. Now it was gone, removed, replaced. And Thomas knew exactly who had ordered it. Before we continue with what Thomas discovered that morning, if you want more emotional, true stories like this one, hit that subscribe button. You won't regret it. Now, back to the story. The sound of footsteps echoed from the east corridor, sharp, purposeful. Thomas recognized that walk. He'd been trailing those footsteps for 6 years now, always 3 paces behind, always watching, always ready. Prince William appeared around the corner dressed in a dark suit, his jaw set in that particular way that meant he'd made a decision. The kind of decision that couldn't be undone. Good morning, sir, Thomas said, stepping aside. William stopped. His eyes moved to the nameplate. For just a second, something flickered across his face. Not regret, not anger, something deeper. Something that looked like grief wrapped in steel determination. Morning, Thomas. His voice was steady, too steady. I trust you slept well. Yes, sir. They stood there in silence. The nameplate hung between them like a confession neither man wanted to acknowledge. Thomas had been trained never to ask questions, never to comment on family matters. His job was to observe, protect, and forget. But some things couldn't be forgotten. William's hand moved toward the nameplate, his fingers hovering just inches away. My mother's name belongs here, he said quietly. It always has. It always will. Thomas felt his throat tighten. In 11 years, he'd never heard William speak about Diana like this, not with this raw, unfiltered pain. There is only one queen in this house, William continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. Only one woman who earned that title through sacrifice, through love, through everything she gave to people who needed her. The words hung in the air like smoke. Thomas wanted to respond, to say something, anything. But before he could speak, another set of footsteps echoed through the corridor, heavier, slower, and Thomas knew with sinking certainty that the real storm was about to begin, because King Charles had just entered the hallway, and he'd seen the nameplate too. Asterisk time seemed to slow down. Thomas could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. King Charles stood at the end of the corridor, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on the nameplate that had replaced his wife's. William didn't move, didn't turn around. He stood perfectly still, his hands still hovering near the brass plate that bore his mother's title, William. Charles's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Father. The single word carried no warmth, no respect, just acknowledgement. Thomas pressed himself against the wall, trying to become invisible. This was not a conversation a protection officer should witness, but he couldn't leave. Protocol demanded he stay within sight of the prince, so he stood there, trapped between duty and the terrible intimacy of a family breaking apart. Charles walked forward slowly, his footsteps deliberate. When he reached them, he stopped 3 feet away, close enough to touch his son, far enough to show the distance between them. I received a call from maintenance this morning, Charles said. His voice was controlled, but Thomas could hear the tremor beneath it. They said someone ordered the nameplates changed. Throughout the entire palace? Without authorization. Without discussion, I authorized it, William said flatly. You don't have that authority. I do in this wing. This is Kensington, not Buckingham, and these are my family's private quarters. Charles's jaw tightened. Camilla is your family. The words hit like a slap. William finally turned to face his father. In the morning light, Thomas could see tears glistening in the prince's eyes, but his voice remained steady. No, William said. She's your wife. She's the woman you chose. But she will never be my mother, and she will never be my children's grandmother. Not in the way that matters. Thomas had never heard William speak like this. So direct, so unforgiving. Charles took a step back, as if physically struck. Your mother has been gone for 27 years, William. 27 years. At some point, you have to what? William interrupted. Forget her? Pretend that everything's fine? Pretend that the woman who chased her, hounded her, helped destroy her marriage, should now wear her crown. That's not fair. Fair? William's voice rose for the first time. You want to talk about fair? My mother was 20 years old when she married you. 20. She had no idea what she was walking into. No idea that she'd spend her entire marriage competing with a woman you never stopped loving. Eh? Charles's face went pale. You don't understand the complexity I understand perfectly. William's voice dropped back to that terrible, quiet tone. I was there, remember? I was the child who watched his mother cry herself to sleep. I was the one who saw her struggle with bulimia while the palace did nothing. I was 12 years old when she died, Father. 12. And you want me to just accept that the woman who helped cause all that pain should now be called queen? The silence that followed was crushing. Thomas could barely breathe. He'd heard rumors, of course. Every protection officer had, but hearing it spoken aloud like this, raw and unfiltered, made it real in a way that rumors never could. Charles seemed to age 10 years in that moment. His shoulders sagged slightly. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. I loved your mother, William. In my own way, I did. But not enough, William said softly. Never enough. Charles looked at the nameplate. His hand reached out, touched the brass surface. What do you want from me? He whispered. I want you to understand that there are consequences, William replied. For all of us. You chose Camilla. Fine, that's your right as king. But don't ask me to pretend history didn't happen. Don't ask me to give her a place in my home that she hasn't earned. She's trying, William. She's been trying for years. I know. And for the first time, William's voice softened slightly. And I respect that. I do. But trying doesn't erase the past. It doesn't bring my mother back. And it doesn't change the fact that in this house, in my children's lives, there is only one queen they need to know about. One queen who loved unconditionally, who gave everything. Charles closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. So that's it then? War between us? William shook his head. Not war, Father. Just truth. Before Charles could respond, a door opened down the hallway. Catherine appeared, carrying Princess Charlotte. The little girl was still in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She saw her grandfather and smiled. Grandpa? The tension shattered instantly. Charles's face transformed, warmth flooding back into his features. But as Thomas watched Catherine's eyes move from her husband to her father-in-law, to the nameplate on the wall, he saw understanding dawn across her face, and he knew the real battle hadn't even begun yet. Asterisk. Catherine stood frozen in the doorway, Charlotte in her arms. Her eyes swept across the scene. Her husband's rigid posture. Charles's devastated expression, the nameplate gleaming on the wall. Thomas watched her take a slow breath. This was the moment, he realized. The moment when she would choose a side. In all his years protecting the royal family, he'd learned that Catherine had a gift for diplomacy. She could smooth over conflicts, bridge gaps, make peace where others saw only war. But not today. Good morning, Charles, she said quietly. Her voice was respectful, but there was steel underneath. She didn't call him father. Thomas noticed. So did Charles. Catherine. Charles's voice was strained. I was just discussing with William. I know what you were discussing, Catherine interrupted gently. She set Charlotte down. Sweetheart, why don't you go find your brothers? Tell them breakfast is in 20 minutes. Charlotte looked between the adults, sensing the tension even at 5 years old. Okay, Mummy. She ran off, her small footsteps echoing down the corridor. When she was gone, Catherine turned back to Charles. The children have been asking questions, she said. About Diana. About why they never met her. About why all their friends have 2 grandmothers, but they only have 1. Thomas saw Charles flinch. We've been showing them videos, Catherine continued. Photos. Telling them stories about their grandmother. About her warmth, her humor, her charity work, the way she loved people. Charlotte asked me last week why there are pictures of Diana everywhere except in the official palace portraits. Catherine, that's not Charles, started. She asked if her grandmother was real or made up, Catherine said, her voice cracking slightly. A 5-year-old child asked me if her own grandmother actually existed or if we were just telling her fairy tales. Charles looked like he might collapse. William moved to his wife's side, his hand finding hers. We're not trying to hurt you, Father, he said, but our children deserve to know who Diana was. Not the sanitized version. Not the uncomfortable memory that gets erased for political convenience. The real woman. I never tried to erase her, Charles protested weakly. Maybe not deliberately, William said. But when you crowned Camilla Queen Consort, when you gave her the title that should have been my mother's, you sent a message. To the world. To history. To my children? You said that Camilla's position matters more than Diana's memory. It's not what I meant, but that's what you did, Catherine said softly. And William is right. In this house, our children will learn about the grandmother who would have loved them beyond measure. The one who fought for the forgotten and the broken. The one who changed the world just by caring. Thomas's radio crackled again. He stepped away slightly, giving them privacy while still maintaining his protective position. But he could still hear every word. I want my sons to have a relationship with Camilla, Charles said desperately. I want peace in this family. Then give us space to honor Diana, William replied. Stop trying to replace her. Stop acting like we should all just move on and forget. Let my children learn about their grandmother without feeling guilty. Let them say her name without everyone in the room getting uncomfortable. Charles was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was broken. I think about her every day, you know. Your mother. I wonder what she'd think of the man I've become. The king I've become. Whether she'd forgive me for the pain I caused her was the most honest thing Thomas had ever heard Charles say. William's expression softened slightly. I don't know if she'd forgive you, Father. I really don't. But I think she'd want us to try to understand each other. To find some way forward that honors both the past and the present. How? Charles asked. How do we do that when you're removing Camilla's name from your home? When you're drawing lines in the sand? The line was drawn the day you married her, William said quietly. I'm just finally being honest about it. I'll be respectful. I'll be civil. I'll do my duty at public events. But I won't pretend she's something she's not. Not to my children. Not in my home. Catherine squeezed William's hand. We're not asking you to choose between Camilla and your grandchildren, Charles. We're asking you to let us choose how we remember Diana, how we teach our children about her. Without interference? Without judgment? Charles looked at both of them. Then at the nameplate. Then back again. If I allow this, he said slowly, I accept that you're going to keep Diana's memory alive in this way. Will you at least try to have a relationship with Camilla? Not as a replacement grandmother, just as a person who's part of this family? William and Catherine exchanged a glance. Thomas saw 1,000 unspoken words pass between them. We'll try, William finally said. But it has to be genuine. No forced photo opportunities. No PR campaigns. Just honest, gradual relationship building. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, we need to accept that too. Charles nodded slowly. He looked exhausted, defeated, but also somehow relieved. All right, he whispered. All right, turned to leave, then stopped. William, your mother would be proud of you, of the father you've become. The way you protect your children, she'd be proud. William's face crumpled slightly. I hope so, he managed to say. Charles walked away, his footsteps slow and heavy. Catherine wrapped her arms around William. He buried his face in her shoulder, and Thomas saw his shoulders shake with silent sobs. It was the most vulnerable he'd ever seen the future King of England, and somehow that made him more human than any crown ever could. Thomas stood guard outside the breakfast room an hour later, listening to the sound of children's laughter drifting through the door. Prince George was telling a joke. Charlotte was giggling uncontrollably. Louis, the youngest, was banging his spoon on the table in delight. Normal family sounds. You'd never know that just 60 minutes earlier, their father had been falling apart in a palace corridor. But Thomas knew. He always knew. The door opened. William emerged, composed now, every trace of emotion carefully locked away. He'd washed his face, changed his tie, put on the mask he wore for the world. Wait, Thomas. I need to speak with you, William said quietly. Walk with me. They moved through the palace together, William's hands clasped behind his back, his pace measured and deliberate. Thomas maintained his professional 3-step distance, but his mind was racing. In 11 years, William had never asked to speak with him privately. They ended up in a small sitting room overlooking the gardens. William gestured for Thomas to sit. Another unprecedented moment. Protection officers didn't sit with royalty. Sir, I don't think Thomas began. Please, William said. What we're about to discuss requires trust, and I need to know if I can trust you. Thomas sat slowly on the edge of a chair. Of course, sir. Always. William studied him for a long moment. You heard everything this morning? Everything my father and I said to each other. It wasn't a question. Thomas nodded. I need to know that stays between us, William continued. Not because I'm ashamed of what I said, but because if that conversation becomes public, it will be twisted, weaponized, turned into headlines that hurt my children. I would never, Thomas started. I know, William interrupted. I've watched you for 6 years, Thomas. I know your character. But I'm asking you, officially, as your future king, to keep what you witnessed this morning in absolute confidence. You have my word, sir. William relaxed slightly. He moved to the window, staring out at the gardens where Diana had once walked with her sons. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you remember her? My mother. Thomas thought back. He'd been 18 when Diana died. Just starting his military training, I remember seeing her on television. At the landmine sites, with the AIDS patients. She had this way of making everyone she met feel important. Feel seen? William smiled faintly. That's exactly what she did. Exactly who she was. He turned back to Thomas. Do you think I'm wrong? For wanting my children to know her? For resisting Camilla's place in their lives? Thomas chose his words carefully. I think you're being a father, sir. Protecting your children's connection to their grandmother? There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm also being the future king, William said. And kings are supposed to put duty above personal feelings. They're supposed to maintain family unity. Keep up appearances. He laughed bitterly. My whole life, I've been told to swallow my pain for the good of the institution. And you have, Thomas said quietly. For years you have. Maybe this is the one place where you get to draw a line. The one place where you get to choose your mother over politics? William's eyes glistened. She used to tell me and Harry that our feelings mattered. That we didn't have to pretend to be happy when we were sad. That being royal didn't mean being emotionless. He wiped his eyes roughly. And then she died. And everyone told us to be strong. Be dignified. Don't cry in public. Don't show weakness. You were 12 years old, Thomas said, his own throat tight. You should have been allowed to grieve. Instead, I walked behind her coffin while the world watched. 1 million people lining the streets, cameras everywhere, and I had to keep my face blank. had to be the brave little prince. William's voice cracked. I wanted to scream, Thomas. I wanted to fall on the ground and sob and tell everyone to go away. But I couldn't. Because duty. Because tradition. Because that's what princes do. Thomas had seen the footage. Everyone had. That image of young William and Harry, following their mother's casket, had become one of the most iconic and heartbreaking moments in modern history. Is that why you changed the nameplates? Thomas asked gently. Because you couldn't grieve then, so you're grieving now? William was quiet for a long time. Maybe, he finally admitted, or maybe I'm just tired of pretending. Tired of acting like my mother's memory can be quietly tucked away so everyone feels more comfortable. She existed. She mattered. She changed the world. And I'll be damned if I let her be forgotten just because her presence makes things awkward. A knock at the door interrupted them. Catherine entered, closing the door softly behind her. The children are asking for you, she said to William. George wants to know if you'll play football in the garden. William nodded, composing himself again. I'll be right there. Catherine looked at Thomas. Thank you, she said simply. For everything you do? For your discretion? Your loyalty? It's my honor, ma'am. She smiled sadly. We're asking a lot of you, I know. To witness our family's pain and carry that weight silently. It's not fair. With respect, ma'am, witnessing your love for each other, your devotion to your children, your courage in fighting for what matters, that's not a weight. That's a privilege. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. She reached out and squeezed Thomas's hand briefly. Diana would have liked you, she said softly. She always valued people who told the truth, who weren't afraid to see the royal family as human beings instead of symbols. She left, taking William with her. Thomas sat alone in the sitting room, his hand still warm from Catherine's brief touch. Through the window, he could see William emerge into the garden, scooping up Louis and chasing after Charlotte while George kicked a football. The prince was laughing, genuinely happy. All the morning's anguish temporarily forgotten. But Thomas knew it wasn't forgotten. Not really. Because that night, something would happen that would test everything William had fought for. Something that would force the entire royal family to confront the truth they'd been avoiding for 27 years. The call came at 9:47 p.m. Thomas was doing his final rounds, checking locks and security systems, when his radio erupted with urgent chatter. Code Blue, private wing. Repeat, code blue. Code blue meant a medical emergency. Thomas ran. He found William in Charlotte's bedroom. The little girl in his arms, her face flushed with fever. Catherine was on the phone with the palace doctor, her voice tight with controlled panic. Her temperature is 104, Catherine was saying. She's been complaining about her throat all evening and now she can barely swallow. We need someone here now, Charlotte whimpered against William's chest. Daddy, it hurts. I know, sweetheart, William murmured, his hand stroking her hair. The doctor's coming. You're going to be fine. But Thomas could see the fear in William's eyes. The same fear every parent feels when their child is sick. And there's nothing they can do but wait. The doctor arrived within 15 minutes. Thomas stood guard outside the room, listening to muffled voices, Charlotte's occasional cries. The sound of medical equipment being unpacked. 20 minutes later, the doctor emerged. It's tonsillitis, she said. Severe, but treatable. I've given her antibiotics and something for the fever. She should start improving by morning. Thomas saw the relief flood through Catherine and William. But the night was far from over. At 11:30, Charlotte's fever spiked again. She started hallucinating, calling for her grandmother. Not Camilla. Not even Catherine's mother. Diana. Granny Diana, she kept saying, her small voice breaking. Where's Granny Diana? I want to see her. Everyone says she's beautiful. Everyone says she's kind. Where is she, Daddy? Why doesn't she come visit? Thomas watched William's face crumple. He held his daughter close, rocking her gently. She can't visit, darling. She's in heaven, but she loves you so much. She's watching over you right now. But I never met her, Charlotte sobbed. All my friends have grandmothers they can hug. Why can't I hug mine? Catherine was crying silently, her hand over her mouth. "I know, sweetheart," William whispered, his own voice thick with tears. "I know it's not fair, but your Granny Diana is special. She's an angel now, and she sends her love through the stars. See?" He carried Charlotte to the window, pointing up at the night sky. "That brightest star right there? That's her, watching over you, protecting you, loving you." Charlotte stared up at the sky, her fever-bright eyes wide. "Really?" "Really," William promised. "And every time you see that star, you'll know she's thinking of you, that she wishes she could be here, that she would give anything to hold you." Thomas had to turn away. The intimacy of the moment, the raw grief and love tangled together, was almost too much to witness. At midnight, Charles arrived. No one had called him, but somehow word had reached him that Charlotte was ill. He appeared in the hallway, still dressed formally from an evening event, his face creased with worry. "How is she?" he asked Thomas. "Stable, sir. The fever is coming down." Charles moved toward Charlotte's room, then hesitated. "Is William? Would he want me here?" Before Thomas could answer, the door opened. Catherine stood there, exhausted but composed. "Charles," she said softly, "come in." Thomas watched Charles enter the room, watched William look up from where he sat holding Charlotte, watched the two men lock eyes. For a moment Thomas thought William might ask his father to leave. The morning's confrontation hung between them like smoke, but then Charlotte stirred. "Grandpa," she murmured. Charles's face transformed. He moved to her side immediately, kneeling beside the bed. "I'm here, darling. Grandpa's here." "I was talking to Granny Diana," Charlotte said, her words slurred with fever and exhaustion. "Daddy showed me her star." Charles went very still. His eyes moved to William, who met his gaze steadily. "Did he?" Charles said carefully. "That's lovely. She's watching over me," Charlotte continued. "Daddy says she loves me even though she's in heaven." "Is that true, Grandpa? Does she really love me?" Thomas saw Charles's throat work, saw him struggle with words that had been trapped inside for 27 years. "Yes," Charles finally whispered. "Your Granny Diana loves you more than you could ever imagine. She would have adored you, Charlotte. You have her kindness, her compassion, her beautiful heart." It was the first time Thomas had ever heard Charles speak about Diana with pure, unguarded love. William's eyes filled with tears. Catherine reached over and took Charles's hand. "Tell me about her," Charlotte said sleepily. "Please, Grandpa. Tell me about Granny Diana." Charles looked at William, asking silent permission. William nodded slowly. "She was magical," Charles began, his voice soft. "When she walked into a room, everything changed. People felt braver, kinder, more hopeful. She had this laugh that made everyone around her want to laugh too. And when she looked at you, really looked at you, you felt like you were the most important person in the world." Charlotte's eyes were closing, but she was smiling. "She loved children more than anything," Charles continued. "She would sit on the floor and play with them for hours. She didn't care if her dress got dirty or her hair got messed up. She just wanted to make them happy, to make them feel loved." "Like Mummy," Charlotte mumbled. Catherine gasped softly. Charles smiled through his tears. "Yes," he said. "Exactly like your mummy. Your Granny Diana would have loved your mother very much, because your mother has the same gift, the same beautiful soul." Charlotte fell asleep mid-sentence, her breathing evening out. Her fever finally breaking, the three adults sat in silence for a long moment. "Thank you," William finally said to his father. "For that? For saying the things you've never said before?" Charles wiped his eyes. "I should have said them years ago. Decades ago, I was afraid. Afraid that talking about her would mean admitting how badly I failed her. How badly I failed you and Harry." "You did fail us," William said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we can't find a way forward." Charles nodded. "The nameplates stay," he said. "It wasn't a question. In your home, Diana's memory stays alive. I won't interfere with that anymore." "And Camilla?" Catherine asked gently. Camilla understands, Charles said. Or she will. She knows she can never replace Diana in your hearts. In the children's hearts. She's known that from the beginning. He paused. But perhaps, in time, there can be room for both memories. Both relationships. Without one erasing the other, William considered this. Perhaps, he said, but it has to be genuine. It has to come naturally. We can't force it, I know. Sat together in Charlotte's room until dawn, taking turns watching over the sleeping child, speaking occasionally in hushed voices, but mostly just existing together in shared space. Shared grief. Shared hope, and Thomas, standing guard outside, realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. Not a perfect reconciliation. Not a fairy tale ending. But something more valuable. Something real. He was witnessing a family learning to be honest with each other, to honor their pain while still choosing love. It was the most royal thing he'd ever seen. 3 weeks later, Thomas stood in the same corridor where it all began. The nameplate still read, Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. Diana's title. Diana's legacy. But something had changed. Not the nameplate. Not the palace. The people Thomas had watched William and Charles navigate a careful new relationship. They weren't close. They might never be close. But there was honesty between them now. Truth instead of performance. They spoke about Diana openly. About the past. About the wounds that would never fully heal. And Camilla, surprisingly, had reached out to Catherine. Not as queen. Not as stepmother-in-law. Just as a woman trying to understand another. A woman's perspective. Thomas had overheard parts of their conversation in the garden last week. Catherine had been kind but firm. I can't give you what you want, she'd said. I can't make William forget his mother or the pain your relationship with Charles caused her. But I can respect you as a person. I can appreciate your efforts. And maybe, over time, we can find a way to coexist peacefully, Camilla had cried. Real tears? Not political tears. I never wanted to hurt anyone, she'd said. I know that sounds hollow. I know my choices had consequences. But I need you to know, I never wanted Diana to suffer. But she did suffer, Catherine had replied gently. And we can't erase that. We can only acknowledge it and try to do better going forward. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a start. Now, standing in the corridor, Thomas heard footsteps approaching. Charlotte appeared, holding George's hand. They were on their way to the library, both carrying books about Princess Diana that Catherine had given them. Thomas, Charlotte called out. Look. This one has pictures of Granny Diana holding baby daddy. Thomas smiled. That's wonderful, Princess. She was beautiful, wasn't she? Charlotte said, showing him the photograph. Very beautiful. And very kind, like Mummy, George added matter-of-factly. Exactly like Mummy. The children continued on their way, their voices echoing down the hallway, talking excitedly about the grandmother they'd never meet, but were learning to love. William appeared moments later, watching his children with soft eyes. He noticed Thomas and walked over. I wanted to thank you, William said quietly, for that night with Charlotte, for every night, for seeing us at our worst and still choosing to protect us. It's my honor, sir. William looked at the nameplate. Do you think I did the right thing? Standing up to my father like that? Thomas considered the question carefully. I think you did the brave thing, sir. The honest thing. And sometimes that's more important than doing the right thing. William smiled faintly. My mother used to say something similar. She said kindness and honesty were more valuable than protocol and tradition. She was wise. She was extraordinary, William corrected. And I spent too many years being afraid to say that out loud. Afraid of upsetting people. Afraid of causing problems. He touched the nameplate gently. But my children won't grow up with that fear. They'll know their grandmother. They'll speak her name with pride. They'll understand that she was human and flawed and complicated and absolutely magnificent. Thomas nodded. That's a beautiful legacy, sir. It's not enough, William said. It will never be enough. She should be here. She should be watching her grandchildren grow up. She should be guiding Catherine, laughing with Harry, growing old with grace. His voice cracked. "She should be alive, I know, sir." They stood in silence for a moment, honoring the grief that would never fully go away. Then William straightened, composing himself. "But she's not here. So we do what we can. We remember, we honor. We love the people she loved. We continue the work she started. We make sure the world never forgets Princess Diana." "It's the people will never forget her, sir," Thomas said. "She's woven into the fabric of this nation, into hearts around the world." William smiled through his tears. "I hope so. God, I hope so." He walked away, following his children to the library, where they would spend the afternoon learning about a woman who died before they were born, but whose love reached across time to hold them. Thomas remained at his post, watching the morning light stream through the palace windows, illuminating the nameplate that had started everything. Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales. 7 words. 1 woman. An eternal legacy. Later that day, Thomas would learn that his supervisors had heard about the confrontation between William and Charles. They'd called him in for questioning, asking what he'd witnessed, what he'd heard. He'd looked them in the eye and said, "Nothing beyond my usual duties, sir. Just another day protecting the family." It was a lie, but it was the right lie. The kind of lie that protected something more valuable than truth. It protected dignity, privacy, the fragile healing of a family, learning to be honest with each other. And that night, when Thomas went home to his own family, his wife asked him about his day. "Anything interesting happen?" she asked. Thomas thought about William's tears, about Charles's confession, about Charlotte's fevered dreams, and the way 3 adults had sat together in the darkness, united by love for a woman who was gone, but never forgotten. "No," he said quietly. "Just the usual palace routine." His wife smiled, kissed his cheek, and went back to her book. Thomas sat in his small living room, in his small house, far from palaces and nameplates and royal drama. But he carried with him the weight of what he'd witnessed. The privilege of seeing a future king choose love over duty, a father choose his children over politics, a family choose honesty over pretense. He'd been a royal protection officer for 11 years. But in those 3 weeks, he'd learned more about true royalty than all his training had ever taught him. Because real royalty wasn't about crowns or titles or perfect public appearances. Real royalty was about protecting the people you love, about speaking uncomfortable truths, about honoring those who came before while building something better for those who come after. Real royalty was a father telling his daughter about the grandmother she'd never meet, pointing to a star in the sky and saying, "She loves you. She's watching. She's proud." And real royalty was a nameplate in a palace corridor that said, "There is only one queen in this house, the Queen of Hearts. Princess Diana, forever remembered, forever loved, forever the standard against which all future royals would be measured." Thomas closed his eyes and hoped that somewhere, somehow, Diana knew that her son had fought for her memory, that her grandchildren would grow up hearing her name with reverence and love, that she hadn't been forgotten, that she would never be forgotten. And in the quiet of his small home, Thomas made a silent promise to the woman he'd never met but had learned to admire through the tears and courage of her son. "I'll protect them," he whispered to the empty room. "I'll protect your legacy. Your children, your grandchildren. I'll make sure your story continues to be told. I'll make sure they never stop saying your name." It was a promise he would keep for the rest of his career. Because some people, some legacies, some loves, are too precious to let fade into history. Princess Diana was one of them. And as long as people like William fought for her memory, as long as children like Charlotte asked to hear her story, as long as protection officers like Thomas bore witness to the impact she'd had on the family she'd left behind, she would remain alive. Not in body, but in every act of kindness, inspired by her example, in every honest conversation about mental health and grief, in every moment when someone chose compassion over protocol. Diana's legacy wasn't just in nameplates and photographs. It was in the hearts she'd touched, the lives she'd changed, the love she'd given freely, without expectation of return. And that kind of legacy could never be stripped away, not by time, not by politics, not by any nameplate in any palace. That kind of legacy was forever.